as Dan mentioned. And at Mota Italic, we design custom and retail typefaces, and most of them, the retail ones, are through our website, that's motaitalic.com. And I do this with my partner and now husband, Rob, and I design mostly the Devanagari and the Indic scripts, and Rob designs the Latin. So together we design multi-script typefaces. As Dan also mentioned, I only recently moved to Berlin, and that's our studio here. But this is just a new change for me. But while I was born and studied until now in Mumbai. And while some cliches for the city are true, that this is also pre-COVID, so this is it's crowded and there's a lot of people. But Mumbai to me is like a city of contrasts. There is also a lot of spaces where there's peace and quiet and like calmness as well. And this contrast kind of translates itself through a lot of different medium, I can see. So this is actually the construction of there's the Mumbai metro line, the train line getting constructed. And I think this is super reflective of this contrast that I'm talking about, because, on one hand, there's this metro construction, which is this high, kind of technologically developed thing, but you have the facade for where the construction is happening is all hand painted letters and hand painted. You can see these illustrations, and I find that really nice. And this is like all throughout the city, like kilometers of this facade hand painted. That is kind of talking about what's coming up. So in India also, I think culturally is quite different and unique and special, because I find a lot of people living together, and there's like a lot of continuity of thought. Like there's a lot of festivals that were celebrated decades ago which are still celebrated, while there's also other technological development. And I found this quite interesting while on the App Store. So this is like a Jap Mala kind of an app, and I find like it's being super strange that you just have to tap on each. So it's kind of like a rosary for people who don't know what this is. So it's for praying, and instead of like having the actual bead, you just click on each bead on this app, and that makes you count it. So I think that's also kind of illustrating very well like the situation in India right now to me, that there is also a very strong cultural background, but also it's kind of getting into the new modern ways. Typographically and linguistically speaking, also it's very diverse, and a lot of people, I'm sure, from India will agree that everybody is multilingual and can read at least more than 2 scripts from India. So these are some that also influences my design work. So these are some of the languages that I can speak and read. To give a brief idea about the scripts and languages, there are 13 scripts officially recognized and 23 languages in the constitution, and around 780 living languages. That means that there are living like speakers who currently use the languages, but at the same time also around 220 languages that have slowly disappeared. So the diversity is enormous. And also there's also the history of if I talk about the history of letter forms from India, there's also a similar structure to like it starts from like manuscripts where you have all the handwritten forms. So that the previous one is a North Indian script manuscript, and that this is a more South Indian manuscript with a palm leaf inscription. This is like a crash course in the history of like letters from India, I think. So this is one of the first early printed letterpress printed material. This is a Gospel of John. That is, again, you can see it's bilingual. Then there was letterpress of way of printing in India. And then slowly that came down to the digital fonts that we use today. So these are some examples of early digitized libraries of fonts that were. So these people who used to make the letterpress then slowly converted their libraries into digital format, and which kind of brought us to this thing called legacy fonts. So some people from India maybe are aware of these font input software called Shri Lipi or Akruti, and these were basically created to make these kind of complex writing systems be accessible on the keyboard. So what these softwares did was they gave you a keyboard, and you could use that keyboard on like on your screen to input in whichever Indian language that you want. The problem here happened was that each of these companies decided a separate encoding for their fonts. And so what happened was that and not Unicode. So there was a big problem of standardization that occurred in the early times. And now slowly that things are becoming more online, then now you have more and more Unicode fonts. Okay, where does this not go? Sorry, I think my computer. I don't know what's happening. Sorry. You can hear me still, right? Or
Yeah, Kimi. I think there was a little bit of a background noise from one of the participants. I think we're good now.
yeah, but actually my presentation is frozen. I can't go to the next
Oh,
slide.
is
Can
it?
you see the next slide, or is it?
We're able to see the Oriya slide.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I don't know what's happening.
Uh, no worries. Maybe we
Oh,
can
there.
just yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Also, if in the streets, there are political reasons that kind of interfere in typographical decisions as well. So if you've gone to any mall or any place, you see that there is usually the brand name is usually in Latin, but there are a lot of rules politically made that you have to have the vernacular, the state script also along with it, which makes it like super. It's kind of compulsory, but it's just like you can see that it's just thrown on there, which happens in a lot. Like I don't even know what this says. The Devanagari just doesn't even make sense anymore. So. mm, Other factors that kind of affect the visual landscape and typography currently is like cost of material. Initially, we would have all these hand painted artists making signs and things, but now you have Flex and DTP. It's like again stuck. Oh no. There. I don't know why this is happening. Yeah, so these, you probably are also aware of these desktop publishing small shops that have sprung around in every corner in every city. And they offer very cheap printing solutions, and even designing sometimes happens. Like you can see there's like DTP designing as a sign, and this makes things available for like super cheap. Actually, maybe I'm gonna try to, sorry. Yeah, so I think like the cost of material makes it so cheap that we see like these kind of flex banners everywhere. Like this is just wishing somebody happy birthday or something. It's kind of like there's uh, you see like letters on these kind of flex banners everywhere. The other kind of issue is Latinization of scripts. And if you see like the Devanagari and Latin as next to each other, you realize that they're completely different in nature. Like the Devanagari sits on a top line, whereas Latin sits on a base line. But when you see a lot of brands, they kind of try to just copy one aspect into the other. And then you have all these examples of like this one is quite unique because they have, the R in the Reed and Taylor is like an uppercase R, but there's obviously no case in Devanagari, but still they try to make the first letter bigger just to copy the same effect. Or even more newer examples of these, like the social uh, restaurant bar chain is like makes use of the stencil, but that stencil is not translated nicely in the Devanagari. It just has these random cuts, which to me don't make sense. And stylistically, also, they're not really matched. If that's in India, but if you see like all around in the world, and this was sent to me by a cousin from Florida. This was like some India section at the Animal Kingdom, and it's so confusing. First, I thought it said India but then later I figured it says Asia, and it's not. It's like so manipulated that you can't even read it anymore. And I have this secret collection of restaurants from everywhere outside India where they have this specific font of like making a top line just stick on the Latin. So it's just, and yeah, this was from Germany, and they're taking it a little one step too far with like even having some, yeah, it's it's quite bad. The reason why this also happens is because the rendering of Indian scripts is slightly more complex than Latin. And you need to have in InDesign or something, you need to have things checked off so that you make sure that, so in this, for example, you can see that this poor man, I feel so bad for him, made probably wanted to write Nirbhayata or Nirdharana, but like got it typed from somebody, I guess, and just did not turn on the script rendering. And now he has this text that does not even make any sense. It's not just that, it's also in everyday situations that I see. So this picture is from behind a flight, if you have any memory of those anymore. But so you see that the ku of the kursi is like just flying somewhere in there where it needs to actually attach to the bottom of the letter. And these to me seem like very casual occurrences where people are not concerned about the displaying the script in its true correctness. We also have a lot of open source fonts, which in India, I hear a lot of people saying free fonts, but they're not technically free. They have a different sort of license. So a big platform for open source fonts is Google Fonts, and you probably have used a lot of Google Font, which also have many Devanagari typefaces on there. But the question that makes me ask is like, by making these available freely, are people making qualitative decisions, or is it just the convenience of getting these fonts like right in your screen? And it's kind of very evident that it is more convenience than qualitative decisions, because this is a font called Balu from Ektype in India, and like if you read the description of the font, it's supposed to be this bubbly, bold, like children friendly, and like this one says 100 seconds crime something. So they're totally using a font that is not probably qualitatively effective for saying something about crime, but just because maybe it's a bold font, they just used it. There's also a hierarchy of problems in India, I feel. And if you are one of these people standing on the train trying to get inside the train, I don't think you care about the fact that the bitmap font on the front does not work. And that's just the truth of a lot of the situation. And so it's difficult to just, as a designer, to sit and complain saying, oh, this is not working or that is not working. I think culturally it was important to me to understand how India is different and special, and then deal with designing my own letters. So I talked about a lot of problems and areas which may seem like it's all hopeless, but it's not. And these are also all things that inspire me to intervene and address certain design problems, all the things that I spoke about. But there's also enough and more inspirations for letter forms traveling around India. There's a huge history of beautiful manuscripts that are available in different states in different scripts. There's also a brilliant culture of like visual, like store signs and hand done letters, which I find extremely exciting when I travel around the country to notice. Like this one is a Bengali bus, like lettering from Calcutta. And it's just the vibrancy of colors and the styles is just so great. These are some book design covers by Satyajit Ray. So I'm just showing some snippets of things that inspire me. These are again, this is from Chennai, a store sign. It's just like the whole combination of different styles together is so great. And so all of this kind of leads me to what I'm going to talk about is what I work with. And I'll share with you a few of my projects, and that kind of illustrate my work process as well. So this was one of my first handwritten typefaces. It was a custom project. So this was also one of my most special projects, I would say. So Mr. Sharad Deshpande, he was a very prolific copywriter and would so his on his 75th birthday, his sons decided to make a font out of his handwriting because his handwriting is very beautiful, and gift it to him since he actually suffered a paralytic stroke and could not write anymore with his hand. So they thought it would be nice to convert his handwriting into a font, and that way he could at least input it and still type with his own handwriting. And I thought that was such a wonderful gesture. And by then I noticed that in handwriting fonts in Latin, there are a lot which have been explored with having multiple alternates of the same letter. So if you can see here, like every letter has different, because in handwriting, you don't write the same letter exactly the same way every time. Every time there's a little bit of change. So to capture that essence, it's been done again in Latin fonts, but it hadn't been explored in Devanagari. So this is what I came with. So this is his handwriting, and I had to basically pick out the characters that somebody has their audio on. Okay.
Yeah, it's sorted.
And so here, yeah, okay. Here you can see the different 4 different alternates of the K. And so what I did was there were, for each letter, we had 4 alternates for the basic consonants. And then with the help of some code that kind of when you type, it randomly appears those different characters. So here you can see the final result of like the scan of the handwriting and the font. And because of these alternates, I think the texture of the font came out nicer, and it was he's no more, sadly, but he was quite happy with the font eventually. While working on this, I was also inspired to add a lot of other things to this font, but since it was his handwriting, I couldn't do it. So I decided to make a version of a handwritten font in my own handwriting. So I started making all these sketches. And so, well, this is not how I write if you just gave me to write a note, but this is a slightly more stylized version of my handwriting. So it was the same process. I drew every letter multiple times and then selected the ones that were that looked good to me. While doing this, I also realized that, this is again where my influence from seeing things in the streets or things like that influence design. Is like you see a lot of times when you drew things like hand lettering, you have these swashes. And I noticed that these swash characters were not really a part of any typeface, the Devanagari typeface that I had seen. And as a handwritten font, I saw the opportunity to add them into this and kind of give them this extra flavor. So I drew a lot of those. And while I was doing that as well, you have a lot of, people use a lot of emojis now, but there's not many that are more Indian inspired. So while I was doing that, because I was drawing everything by hand, I decided to add a lot of these Indian inspired icons as well. So you see like a nut or like a lantern and a lot of them were also inspired from festivals, because we have so many, and you see all these, on WhatsApp or something, people keep sharing them. And I thought it would be nice to have these icons accompanying the style of the font also. Okay, so that is how the Devanagari and Latin look next to each other. Just like a short thing of like the process. So basically I drew them by hand, then they were traced and cleaned using the software Glyphs. Then it just doesn't stop at just drawing letters in the software, and then you don't just get a font. So there's also, because in Devanagari, we have the matras, like there's the top accents and the bottom ones. So there is something called mark positioning that you have to do, wherein you basically have to make sure that the matra like sits exactly where you want it to. I'm not going to go into like too technical details, but this is just to give you an overview of what all entails in the process of making fonts. And when like the tattoo that I showed, that was like broken, and that is because in Devanagari also, like a lot of Indic scripts, you also need some like font production backend engineering sort of to make sure that we have these conjunct letters. So if I have to write akshar, so the way we would write it is like a, ka, and then halant, sh, and ra, and the ka, halant, sh should combine into making the ksha. So this is the correct rendering of the conjunct, which needs to be written in the backend as code, wherein I will say substitute like the ka, halant, and sh by akshar. So there's multiple such conjuncts which need to be coded in the backend for the font to work correctly. So this is just like a screenshot of the code, of the backend code of what needs to happen. Like there's a list of all the conjuncts that we need to design. And so Maku was started off being only a Devanagari and uppercase font, now has expanded into uppercase, lowercase, Greek, Cyrillic, and Devanagari. So it's a huge multi-script family now. And a couple years back, it was licensed by Apple, and it's available on the Mac iOS now. So I think it has some 3,000 characters now, which is a lot more. So that's how it looks. And I think what this font made me really realize, and as a process, was to not just be looking at type design as just drawing letters and making fonts, but also how I can incorporate new things into a design that are unique to the script, that are unique culturally to Devanagari. So I think the swashes and the like the swash characters and these Indian inspired icons, everything were an attempt to use the existing technology and bring a lot of newness and freshness to the type that I'm drawing. I also try to make some products with using the typeface. Okay, the next one I want to show you is Chikki. This was a typeface family that has Devanagari, Gurmukhi, and Latin. This also started with the idea was to draw something that does not have curves. So the entire typeface is made only with straight lines. But if you see it in text and in smaller sizes, it's still pretty legible, and you don't really miss the fact that there's no curves in it. So it was kind of a brief that I gave myself to not make it look still too harsh, but yet have no curves. So that's the typeface. And with Chicky, what I was trying to do is, if you're aware of variable fonts, that's the newest font format. And wasn't any Devanagari variable font until then, so this was the first one that was introduced. And basically, what it does is, you have a weight axis. You can have any sorts of axes, and you can slide through all the weights. So if usually you'll have a regular, bold, medium kind of weights, but what variable fonts let you do is, you can choose your own bold, sort of. So, if you think like the bold that is preset in the font is a little bit too bold, then you can, with CSS and things like that, you can exactly put the number and then get the boldness that you want. So it kind of makes things very flexible within the axis that is being provided. While I was drawing this, I also am very interested in drawing in other Indian scripts as well. So I decided, I was also learning on the side to draw a little bit of Gurmukhi. So I decided to start practicing writing the script. So Gurmukhi, for people who are not aware, is the script that you write Punjabi with, the language Punjabi. And so I kind of translated the same flavor into Gurmukhi. And again, like I said, because I'm always interested in bringing some more cultural aspects into my font. So I designed all these in the background. If you see the patterns, they're very they're inspired from the Fulkari embroidery that is very prominent from Punjab. So it makes all these different, so there are individual elements and you can combine them to make these kind of different Fulkari patterns, which I thought is again very unique to that script. So yeah, so while working on Chicky, I'm always inspired to use newer technology to to its optimum and try and make new things. So I was thinking, oh, maybe I can use, so there's also now color fonts formats that you can have like different layers. So I thought, okay, maybe I can try to do that. And I was really excited with the initial result that I got. And I, in like some one weekend, got into like making the basic consonants. But then I realized, oh, this is 6 layers, and my character set has like 1700 something glyphs, and that's going to be so many layers. So then for now I've let it be. But I do plan to get back to it sometime and finish it, and maybe have some funky color font out of Chicky. While designing all of these, so these are all of our retail fonts, we realized that to improve the reach of our fonts, we decided to launch this beta font program. So what basically this is that we release a particular font in parts. So it kind of we start off the design and it's a smaller character set and it's maybe only one weight, and then and that's for a cheaper price. And as we go designing it more, we add more characters, the price slowly increases. But what it makes you do is kind of invest in the design also, for us to test out what designs are working, what are not. Because again, I feel in the indie typeface licensing scenario, it's still a little bit slow. There is still not as much awareness of how, what are the licensing principles. So this lets us, as you see, like the character sets for Devanagari fonts are quite huge. So instead of like spending 6 months developing a whole font and then releasing, we thought like we could experiment trying to do it part by part and see how that works. And this was started in the middle of the pandemic, really. So I was drawing this typeface called Linny. And this was literally the second day of the lockdown that I started drawing this. And this is one of my recent fonts. So it has Latin and Devanagari right now. And a couple months back, it was also awarded the TDC certificate, which was interesting. And it was also, I think, because of the lockdown, we're not going anywhere. It was also one of the quickest typefaces that I finished. Also, in this one, what I tried to do is like there's a lot of different conjuncts, but you can see that they kind of, all of them, they don't hang below the baseline. They're all in the same height of the of the kana, and that is also something that I had seen in Jaini manuscripts, and that is something that I kind of tried to borrow from it, which suited this design. Again, this is going to be a variable font, and there's a width axis, which is, and also hopefully soon in time, there's also going to be a italic axis. So there's going to be some back slanted. So I'm exploring this right now. Again, I decided to add some like super condensed icons in this. Okay, and one of the last projects that I want to share with you is also very special, is the Pula 100 project, which was, I'm not sure if everybody's aware of Pula Deshpande. He was a great writer and performer in the Marathi literature world. And I grew up reading a lot of his books. And when I was approached to digitize his handwriting on the occasion of his birth anniversary, I was really excited because it's super special. And that was one of my also recent handwritten projects. What I love about them, about handwritten projects, is to really get, when I was going through all his handwritten samples, it was almost like getting to know a person, because you kind of get to see all these very specific things that a person does in their handwriting. So you can see that, like, the curve with that u matra is like so specific to what he is doing. So I think that's a very special experience for me. Well, and that's mostly what I'm drawing with my typefaces. But when I'm not drawing letters, I'm usually teaching and taking workshops. When I was in Mumbai, when I could do it more in person. And one of the main things that I try to do when I do that is to incorporate Indian scripts and typography from India in the course, because it's strange, but even though I'm sure like a lot of people would agree, in design education, there's very little that we deal with Indian language typography or letter forms while we study. Most of our graphic design is based on Swiss or Western type design or typography, and which, while is nice to learn, it feels like a disconnect to me that you don't learn about the scripts that you are in the country that you're from. So it's always been one of my goals to kind of include that and introduce that to young students. So from learning that to like doing kind of, so this was a fun exercise that I did with students where they had to, near their colleges, they had to find street vendors and design signs for them. So this is like some of the examples from Pearl Academy. So they made like a chas sign for them, which I thought was quite nice for, like, as like dealing with a client, but this is just trying to convince them that, okay, we can make a free sign for you. We've also made some kind of educational material. So this is a book that we kind of designed for a workshop, which gives an overview of Devanagari script and has some fun exercises and drawing things on there. You can see that on our website. Other things that I like to do is like to meet people and collaborate with them for different projects. So usually working on Devanagari when somebody else has drawn a Latin, or just it's sad with the lockdowns and we've not been able to travel and meet people, but I'm hoping that in the near future I will be able to meet people again, because that's really also enriches the design process. Me and Rob both love to collect books and archives. So whenever, even in Mumbai, we've collected a lot of just store signs that you can see some posters and things behind us. So because I feel like when I was studying, I missed a lot of seeing visual resources a lot. Even in universities or academic scenarios, there wasn't much that I could see. But when I went to Reading, for example, they had a massive library and all this archive of things, which really makes, especially for a student, it's really nice to have to see all these different visual resources. Another very big part of my work is also being part of different design communities. So Alphabets, for people who don't know about it, is a blog and a website of women from different parts of the world and their work in type. So there's different articles about various various fields, about fonts, lettering, everything. And you must, if you've not seen it, I definitely encourage that you check this out. When we were in Mumbai, we used to organize these monthly meetups called To Post Amtish Mumbai, and they were every month, and we would just gather with people who also like letters and do a lot of maybe sometimes sketching exercises or things like that, and just talk about the field. Now that we are in Berlin, we are a part of the Type Thursday Berlin team, and it's just also again nice to meet people from the city that you're in and share work and just beers sometimes. Well, that's mostly what I do, and what's next for me is just more fonts. And well, that's it. And thank you for listening.
Yep, wonderful. So, folks, yeah, who have any questions, please do. When we have open for questions. So we have a bunch of questions in the chat. Yeah, we can definitely pick that up.
Yep.
Yep. So I think the first one is like, so even I have personally a few things. So I'll try to cover up even mine. So I think the first one is, so Kimia, do you do any kind of readability test and all, like before it gets into production, or at what point of a time is it in the process?
Um, Readability tests with,
Yeah,
like,
like
mostly it's,
uh
sorry, I mean, when we are designing a font, so for example, if it is a text typeface that is going to be used for small sizes or whatever, then yes, there is extensive testing for the size that it's intended for. So we'll make a lot of printouts and things like that. Or there's also, we have some online testing tools, because a lot of times now we're expecting our fonts to be on screen. So, for different sizes and things like that. So yes, we do a lot of testing depending on the typeface.
Got it. Yep. So personally, what do you think is the toughest part in the process of figuring out the typeface? I mean, I thought the tracing was looking very difficult part, and then maybe even the figuring out. I don't know, like what is your personal thought on
Coming
that?
up with a name.
Oh, is it? Okay, I think you already have like that. That kind of partially answers the other question from Santosh, right? So yeah, how do you come with this cool names? So what inspires you?
I think it's really difficult naming fonts, because sometimes, I mean, I feel it sometimes just clicks. Like for Chicky, I think I was drawing it for a long time, and like was just like thinking, I don't know what I should name it. But one day, I don't know, somehow it just came to me, because chicky is this like brittle kind of thing, and for people who don't know, and like, so that breaking of that chicky was like what made me think of, like, I was like, yes, this totally goes with the font now. So that's how it
Got
came
it.
up. So
In fact, I think the name itself will inspire you to like figure out the concept, right? Because yeah, I don't know, like is that the way how you think,
hmm no,
or
I
the
don't I
name
don't
comes
think I have
after
thought of a
after you?
name and being yeah,
Okay,
no.
okay. Yeah. So I think so. Even I had a question related to Rob's thing, right? Which was like, so yeah. So the other question is like, so since Rob is his native speaking language is different, so who is your master crit, right? So where do you get your in,
Well, it's all. Hmm. I mean, it again depends on the project. Like with Chiki, when I was drawing Gurumukhi, that was my first time drawing for that script. Then there are people who have been designing in the script for a long time, or native readers is a lot of times that I go and show my typefaces to people. Uh, I always try to show it to designers and also people who have no connection to design, just to
okay.
get a feel of like if they can read it nicely or what is there. because for a new script, it's difficult for me also to understand like how far I can push a certain form of the letter. So then it's nice when, like, it's somebody's uncle or grandmother or something who's looking at your font and saying, oh, but I don't recognize this
Got it.
letter, which is a more relatable audience for your fonts, right? Because when it goes out in the world, it's anybody should be able to read it ideally.
Okay.
But well, I have some old professors that I show work to also, and some also a lot of times colleagues from the industry that I uh, show initial designs to and get feedback from.
Yep.
And although Rob doesn't exactly draw all of them, he, like I mentioned, he does have a little bit of background in Devanagari, because when he went to Reading, he also studied a little bit of, and his first typeface also had a Devanagari in it. So he has a fair bit of
Okay. Yeah.
understanding about it
In
also.
fact, my follow-up question was that, right? So what do you think when so Rob also took a stab at Devanagari typeface, and then somebody like you which is your native language. So do you think still people who don't appreciate the language, or I mean they still don't understand the language, they can still do justice, or how do you think was there any difference at all?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. I think it is really, for me, it is very case by case. Like, I know a lot of people who did not read a script like Devanagari or something, but spent a lot of time researching and learning about the script and are then designing. And then I think that makes your design well informed. If you have invested that much time to learn about it and practice it, then of course you can. But I think I also feel like just because I know Devanagari does not mean that I want to design fonts for, other, it's both ways. So I think it really depends on the intent and the amount of efforts you put in honing any skill. I think to me, it's a skill based
Uh,
vocation. So you can, if you do want to learn it and design in it, then yes. But of course, I would definitely suggest, if it's not your native script, then to get feedback from people who do read and know the script. That's very essential, especially in the initial parts of your design.
Yep, yep. So, and so generally, people try and test it, right? I mean, we have this, lorem ipsum, and then basically there's the quick brown fox, a very famous sentence, right, which kind of covers all those 26 alphabets. So, is there a very similar thing for in Devanagari?
Well, actually, there's this again late professor called Mukund Gokhale. He kind of had this Sanskrit verse, which has a lot of the basic
Mm,
consonants that he shared with me that I sometimes use, but there's no one line. Actually, when you're designing fonts, you don't just like look at one pangram line and decide if your font works, right? There's a lot of combination of different texts that you need to choose from. Also, different languages. So when I'm working with Devanagari, I have to test Marathi text, also Nepali text, also Hindi, because the textures of all of them, even though using the same script, are slightly different. So to make sure all of it works okay. So yeah, there's no one line, but
got it, got it. So, yeah, we have a question from Amanda. So apart from this weight, width, and slant, did you try and explore the other aspects of typeface?
Y- uh, yeah, I mean, I would like to. I think I have this other idea of maybe trying with the stroke endings and
Mhm.
kind of how different contrast can work. Yeah, I mean, I it's also a question that I ask myself to, like, certain decorative aspects can also be a part, or
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yep. So I mean, so I think you had mentioned some few software tools. I mean, so in general, what are the if somebody who's aspiring to get into the typeface, so what are the softwares or tools that they need to use, or
So
what do
I
you
personally
recommend?
I use Glyphs, this app called Glyphs app.
Glyphs.
And
Okay.
but unfortunately, that is a Mac only app. So if you're using a Windows system, then There are other options. There is, if you're starting off, there is a free software called FontForge. That's an open source one. Otherwise, there's FontLab. There's also other Mac-based software called RoboFont. Actually, we have yeah, there's a lot many, but I prefer to use Glyphs.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah. So we have another question from Siri. So yeah, this is again the question actually came back to my like what are the most critical step, right? So especially with all these handwritten fonts, right? So I mean it's very organic shape. So you're gonna have a lot of curves and freehand. Uh, so how do you make sure that those the details and the curves so do you try and manage it from the beginning itself, or do you try to improvise when it's kind of converted into a actual font? So where do you try and hit a balance and yeah? So what are those intricacies that goes in that?
Yes, I think so. With the handwritten fonts, at the start of it, there's always like if it's a custom project, I usually ask the client if they want what is the texture of the letters that they're looking at. Are they wanting something that's super rough, like rough looking corners, or do they want something very smooth? Like Maku, for example, has these neatly drawn curves. So it's not once I traced it and I got it into the font software, they were all redrawn as
Okay.
new shapes. But in the case of like the third one that I showed, that those letter forms were just traced into glyphs and then exported with some kind of a script that makes the edges kind of rough. So
Okay.
that the script is written in the software, so then I don't have to do anything specifically to clean out the curves if that's not a requirement. So it's both. So I think like sometimes I do trace them and then redraw them, and sometimes I just leave them really rough.
Okay. So do you recommend
Does that
that?
answer
So
your
you
question?
you do your the tracing part?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
okay. So oh, okay, that kind of answers. So because then you have the freedom to because it's your creativity, so you know when to like try to improvise or when to stop it. So but when
Well,
it
you
when it's been passed to somebody else, then let's say the tracing is done by somebody else, and I only like figure out the concepts. So then how do they try and manage those loss of
um,
details?
I'm not sure I
Yeah,
understand
so the
your
question is like,
question.
let's say I kind of conceptualize the font, right? I mean the typeface, and let's say the tracing part I hand it over to somebody else, right? So he or she is on the designer. So is that even a recommended process, or it's the entire thing is done by
What
the same
I mean,
designer?
I guess like if it's somebody else's handwriting that you're digitizing, I think
Mhm.
what's most important is to retain the essence of their handwriting. So, I mean, there are in some, you cannot 100% replicate that, because
Right.
again, like you can make only maybe four alternates, five alternates, but it still is not like it's not 100% their
Yeah.
handwriting. So I
Yeah.
think like if you have the sensitivity to understand like what parts need to be retained so that you recognize that person's handwriting, that is what matters. So I think even if somebody else is tracing, that's okay, as long as they do get the gist of the design. If you take somebody else's handwriting and then tweak it somewhat to your own liking, then you're not being authentic to the letters from that person.
Got
So
it. Yep, yep. So maybe for the larger audience, if you can just help us understand what is this custom font and what is the retail font, right? So yeah, uh,
well, retail fonts are the ones that, so if you go on our website, you see like the ones that I showed, Chiki, Maku, and all of them, they have been, so we designed them and they are available on our website for any graphic company, advertising, whoever to license them from
mhm,
our website. So those are retail fonts, while custom fonts are something that are specifically designed for a client. So like before, when you mentioned Skoda, so that was like a custom project where the company comes to you and says that we want a font that we want to use either for our brand identity or corporate communication, or
mhm.
inside, like in the case of Skoda, for like inside the car display or something. So
Got
then that is a custom typeface that was designed for especially for that company, and that is not something that we sell on our own.
Okay, got
So
it.
that's unique to to the client.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah, I think we kind of crossed the hour mark, but maybe another couple more questions. Is it okay? Yeah. So yeah, I think that so one question I had was like, so as a typeface designer, like, well, how do we try and monetize some of the work? So what are the other options or variations? So because if somebody wants to get into this field, so maybe it'll be a very little important aspect of to try and analyze, right?
Hmm. Well, I mean, like I mentioned, with the retail fonts is something
Okay.
that you design, and then you can, and this is not like you don't need to have a shop on your own. You can also offer your fonts with other platforms. So, for example, like Future Fonts is one um, that if you're starting off, then you can submit your work to this uh, platform, and then they kind of evaluate if they want it on their
Mhm.
platform, and then you can sell through other companies as well. So it's not that if I design a font, I need to have a website and sell it myself. So you can, like my fonts, or there's a lot of other platforms that you can sell fonts through. Though I must say that it's I mean, it's a little bit tricky if you're starting off. It's if I always said that to myself, and like a lot of students that I work with, if you're like hoping to just like get a lot of money and like be rich in a year, then like type design is not for you. You need a lot of, I think the work also translates with things. I think there's a lot of patience that you need to um, and time investment that you need, because it's not exactly like quick returns on things.
Mhm.
So but custom projects are some things that are also that work different monetarily, because there's a company that's saying, okay, will you design this for us? And that is almost like a branding project or
Understood.
something. So that's,
Yeah.
you can also like collaborate with some other designers. So, if somebody has, if you know Bengali, and so, if somebody approaches us and says, oh, I want to draw the Bengali version of Chiki, so then that could also be a project. So it's not, there's no like just one format.
Got it. Yep. Okay. One last question. I think we have two questions very related to this. So it's more driven with. So how can technology help? So today we have this AI and maybe even so can the technology also help us to like create alternatives, right? For example, like every time, let's say I create one handwritten family and I want to create a series of it. So can the software try and help us to do the variations rather than we try and do it manually? I mean, is there some possibility you think in future, or you're kind of totally against it?
Well, I mean, if it stops giving me work, then yes, I'm against it, I guess. But I have heard of the possibility of software taking over designing fonts, and I don't know, maybe that'll happen. I'm not sure. But I mean, to answer the specific question of alternates, I think I'm sure it is possible to, I'm not, I don't code or write scripts myself, so I wouldn't know what technically is required to do it. But yeah, I think it could be possible to make certain tweaks. But I think, especially with handwritten examples, I think for me the fun is in like actually looking at somebody's handwriting and picking out those things, and that is something that I'm deciding, and I'm not sure if artificial intelligence is like there yet where they can make those decisions.
Understood. Yep. Yep. Wonderful. So any closing notes?
From me,
Yeah.
well, I don't know. Thank you for listening and being patient. I hope it wasn't too long. And if you have any other questions which you couldn't ask right now, you can. Oh, somebody asked about Instagram channel. I can leave some in the chat, then you can contact me and ask your questions later.
Yep. Yep. Definitely.
Oh, and
Well,
also license fonts, please. Don't use pirated fonts.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, I mean, thanks a lot, Kimya, for sparing your time. And yeah, I think it was great insights, especially like people who love typefaces and into graphic design and typography. I think it's a great session. Thanks a lot, and yeah, thanks all, and have a great weekend.
Thank you. Thanks a
Yeah,
lot. Have a
see
nice
you.
weekend, everyone.